Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Driving Learner Outcomes Through Competency-Based Learning. As you join us, if you'd give us your name, your position, and any questions you have right now about competency-based learning as we're waiting for folks to join us. And in your comments, please set your chat comments to everyone, share where you're from. If you have questions, put it in there, and I'm going to be monitoring the chat. We're going to give everybody another minute and a half, and then we'll get started. Yes, please share your name, where you're from, what do you do? I see we have people from Wyoming, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Sioux City, Iowa, Oregon. Good job. Lots of places. Minnesota, Tennessee. It's great to see people from so many places. If you're just joining us, please put your name, where you're from, your position in the chat. I'll make your comments go to everyone. And if you already have a question about competency-based learning, feel free to put that in as well. Okay, I think we're going to get started. My name is Cindy Moss. I'm the VP of Innovation and STEM at Defined Learning, and we're joined with three outstanding educators. We're going to share their thoughts around competency-based learning. First, we have Cinnamon Schufley, and Cinnamon, she's currently the Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction for the Lindsay Unified School District. She previously served as the principal of Washington Learning Community in Lindsay for 12 years. She served the community of Lindsay for over 29 years through the transition to system-wide transformation to build a learner-centered, performance-based system. Cinnamon has served in the capacity of learning facilitator, reading specialist, director of preschools, site principal of learners in a K-8 setting, and executive director of curriculum and instruction. She earned an MA in education, a BA in liberal studies from Cal State University, Fresno, holds a reading specialist certificate, has been certified in reading recovery, descubriendo la lectura, and is BCLAD certified in the language of Spanish. You guys in education know we don't do this work alone. She's joined in the amazing work they're doing in Lindsay by Melissa Hawkins. Melissa is Director of Educational Systems at Lindsay. She works on implementing systems within the district to ensure all learners are prepared for success beyond their K-12 system. Her work centers around the development of curriculum in all subject areas with the goal of meeting the needs of all learners in a performance-based system. She also provides professional development to support the delivery of curriculum using research-based instructional practices. In addition to her current role, she's worked as a coach supporting teachers in the development of learner-centered systems in their learning environments. Prior to that, she taught kindergarten through 8th grade in Lindsay, along with the teacher interns within Tulare County. She earned her master's degree in mathematics education and her administrative certificate from Fresno Pacific University. Our next panelist is Carol Ann Tomlinson, and you're probably like me, a fangirl of Carol Ann. She's a William Clay Paris Jr. professor and chair of the Educational Leadership Foundations and Policy at the University of Virginia's Curry School of Education. Prior to joining the faculty at UVA, she was a public school teacher for 21 years. During that time, she taught students in high school, preschool, and middle school, and also administered programs for struggling and advanced learners. She was Virginia's Teacher of the Year in 1974. At UVA, she was named Outstanding Professor in the Education School in 2004 and received an All-University Teaching Award in 2008. In 2022, Carol was ranked number 12 in the Education Week EduScholar Public Presence rankings among university-based academics who are contributing most substantially to public debates about school and schooling, and as the number 3 voice in curriculum and instruction. She's the author of over 300 books, book chapters, articles, and other educational materials. Carol works throughout the United States and internationally with educators who seek to create classrooms that are more effective with academically diverse student populations. You can see we have an incredible group of educators who are joining us, and at the end, we'll come back for any questions that you have. So at this point, I'm turning it over to my friends from Lindsay to show us how they're doing this amazing work in their school system.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you, Dr. Moss, for such a rich introduction, and it is an honor to be here with Melissa as well as Ms. Tomlinson. I'm very excited to be here with you today and appreciate the time. Again, my name is Cinnamon Schufley, and I'm currently the Executive Director for Curriculum and Instruction here in Lindsay. I am in year 30 in Lindsay, and it's been just a whirlwind of a career thus far, and went much faster than I ever thought possible. A lot has happened in Lindsay over the last 30 years, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about our journey with competency-based education, as you might hear it referred to in Lindsay as our performance-based system, and wanted to share a little bit about our community. Lindsay Community is a Title I public school district. We have 100%, it says free and reduced, but it's actually free. Everyone is able to have access to free lunch. 93% Hispanic or Latino, 31% English learners currently, down from about 64% 10 years ago. So making some progress there, but still at 31%. And 43% of our learners are from homes where one or both parents self-report that they are not high school graduates. About 30%, this shifts here and there, are migrant learners or qualify for our migrant program. We are our own migrant region, which is not typical for different counties in California. So Lindsay is our own migrant region. And we have 12%, and this also shifts, that meet state and federal standards for homelessness. And our parents self-report, and their adult education level on average is around 5th grade. Lindsay's at the top of a couple of other important lists in the state of California. When looking at adult literacy rates, with 50 being having the highest percentage of adult literacy, we are actually number 5 in the state, and we are in the top 5 of adults living below poverty line. So as you can see, there are some challenges here, but there are also a lot of opportunities, and we employ an asset-based attitude and are happy to be part of the community of Lindsay. So it's a little bit about us. I'm going to illustrate some of the journey we've been on with a video. It's about 9 minutes, and it will give you a little bit of background, which talks a little bit about the shift from an industrial age, very traditional system from 30 years ago and beyond, and shows a little bit about where we are today after we employed the competency-based education, or as we call it, the performance-based system. So this tells a little bit about our journey of how we got there. So we'll play that for you now.
In the year 1890, the people of Lindsay, California came together with a goal of providing a better life for their children, a life that included opportunities for education and personal growth. With these aspirations in mind, they founded an independent public school district, and Lindsay Unified was born. Beginning in the early 1990s, Lindsay faced a number of challenges, both economically and academically. It became clear that in order to give the children of Lindsay an opportunity to succeed, big changes would be necessary. The transformation would have to start with culture. In 2005, LUSD leaders met with B. McGarvey. B's consultation helped Lindsay leaders begin to transform their own mindset to focus on the future. By 2006, Chuck Schwan joined B in supporting the district. With their guidance, along with leadership from Marzano Research, Lindsay Unified committed to a complete transformation from a traditional time-based education system to a learner-centered model which allows learners to advance based on mastery of educational content. They pledged to meet learners at their actual level of knowledge and skill, allowing them to reach their fullest academic and personal potential. But a system such as the one LUSD envisioned does not manifest from the top down. It requires engagement from every individual stakeholder in the community. So in 2007, the district hosted multiple community forums to solicit input for a new strategic design that would guide every action from then on. They asked 5 guiding questions of the community, and together they arrived on a strategic design that would serve as the blueprint for building and sustaining the vision of the Lindsay performance-based system. With the vision for empowering and motivating for today and tomorrow, the Board of Trustees adopted the community's strategic design. In 2008, the district dove headfirst into its new commitment to performance-based education, including the adoption of a visionary vocabulary that redefined the roles of every stakeholder. Students, as co-constructors and prime determiners of their learning, were now called learners. Teachers became learning facilitators, a title that better represented their new role in supporting meaningful and relevant learning opportunities. With the help of a major bond initiative, school buildings transformed into learning communities, complete with new K-8 facilities and even a new high school location. That same year, curriculum progressions were developed and clear distinctions were drawn between the time-based and performance-based models. Brewing cultural shifts began to bubble over in 2009, when major aspects of the strategic design saw their first implementation with the freshman class at Lindsay High School and Vanguard, a group of K-6 learning facilitators piloting newly developed measurement topics. In 2011, PBS expanded to all learners in content levels 7 through 12. For 2 years, the district went through many check and adjust phases, fine-tuning their practices before fully implementing the performance-based system in 2013. With PBS fully implemented, the learners began to see a shift in the culture. A small group of learners at Lindsay High School published a book in which they shared their life stories with the world. The U.S. Department of Education awarded LUSD the $10 million Race to the Top grant, which allowed them to create a system-wide model of personalized learning. In 2014, the district went one-to-one, putting a laptop or mobile device in the hands of every learner in accordance with the district vision of making learning accessible anytime and from anywhere. With a device in the hands of every learner, LUSD contracted Empower Learning to build a learning management system that gave learners 24/7 access to their data and learning plans and allowed learning facilitators to curate resources and information. Lindsay stakeholders understand that people learn in different ways and in different time frames, and that they also have different goals and aspirations. With this in mind, Lindsay High School introduced Pathways and Academies in the year 2014. These programs allow learners to tailor their learning to their own interests and craft a learning plan with courses relevant to their unique ambitions. In the year 2015, John J. Cairns High School teamed up with Big Picture Learning to provide opportunities for learners to pursue their own professional aspirations by interning with local businesses. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation joined the vision, awarding LUSD the C2D2 grant, which would allow them to advance development of PBS in partnership with Summit Public Schools, Transcend Education, and Columbia Law School's Center for Public Research and Leadership. In 2016, Lindsay Unified provided every learner and their parents with 24/7 access to the web and the world through the implementation of the Community Wi-Fi project. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative granted funds to begin Lindsay Leads, a team of learners, staff, parents, board members, and district leaders who serve as consultants and scale PBS both within the district and across the country. In order to create alignment around the beliefs and teaching strategies of the performance-based system, the district office created the Learning Facilitator Handbook, a comprehensive guide to the philosophies and practices that lay the groundwork for their system-wide transformation. As Lindsay Unified transformed, others around the world began to take notice. In 2017, the district published a book with Marzano Research titled Beyond Reform: Systemic Shifts Towards Personalized Learning. In it, they share stories and strategies for replicating their success in the performance-based system. The signs of those successes continued to mount. As Lindsay's performance-based system gained prominence on a national scale, the Department of Education invested with the Teacher and School Leader Grant, a multi-million-dollar award that would enable the district to advance development of quality instruction and skilled leadership. The district's visionary vocabulary continued to evolve, swapping professional development with professional learning, a semantic indication that all stakeholders are in fact learners. And holding with that belief, LUSD transformed professional learning in 2018 by introducing adult learning curriculum look-fors along with the updated Empower 3.0. That same year, the Carnegie Foundation of New York joined the vision supporting the scaling of Lindsay Leads, and the district was recognized as an innovative public school district by the California State Assembly. In 2019, Lindsay and Transcend Education began a powerful collaborative to clearly define and advance the concept of learner-centered leadership. This lab supports system leaders from across the country and eventually the globe to deepen their professional core and advance the learner-centered concept. In the year 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic caused governments around the world to shut down schools. Lindsay Unified closed its facilities at the end of the day on March 17, 2020, but because of their anytime, anywhere approach to education and technology, they were able to reopen for virtual learning the very next day. In 2021, Lindsay Unified partnered with Alder Graduate School of Education to build the Growing Our Own Teacher Residency Program. The program pairs Lindsay graduates and classified staff with our expert mentor learning facilitators. These residents earn a teaching credential and a master's degree while co-teaching alongside one of our most successful and experienced learning facilitators for an entire year. In 2022, the program expanded to include residents from around the Central Valley. Lindsay partnered with Dinuba, Woodlake, and Cutler-Arosa Unified School Districts to ensure their learners would also receive access to the very best learning facilitators. In December of 2022, LUSD announced a major gift of $8 million from the Mackenzie Scott Foundation to the Lindsay Educational Foundation. The donation will directly support scholarships and charitable gifts to Lindsay graduates as they pursue their preferred futures. With consistent academic gains, a 94% graduation rate, and school climate index scores in the 99th percentile, it is evident that Lindsay is committed to its continued transformation. Lindsay Unified School District, empowering and motivating for today and tomorrow.
Okay, thank you for sharing that time with me. This is one of our videos that gets a lot of attention based on people that visit, people that see it. I want to talk just a little bit about what we just saw, make some clarifications, and just talk a little bit about strategic design. So I'm not just an employee in Lindsay. I have two grown sons who are in their 20s now that attended Lindsay schools from preschool all the way through high school. They are graduates of Lindsay High, so I do have a parent perspective as well. And I was here when we made the transition into a performance-based system and really focused on competency-based education. There were a lot of people at the time who told us how hard it would be, how impossible it would be, especially people would say for a Title I school district, it just sounds really, really hard. And the truth was what we were doing already was really, really hard. We were working really, really hard, but what we were doing wasn't working. And we chose to embrace a change. The parents were very supportive because they knew what we were doing wasn't working. Our learners were also, for the most part, very supportive and were willing to come with us on this journey. So the video speaks about strategic design, and more than 100 people were gathered for that process. It took just under a week together to really craft what we wanted for our Lindsay learners and what we expected our graduates to be. Our graduates are a gift to the world. And what would we as parents, educators, community members, board members, learners themselves, what would we want for our graduates? So the strategic design was built in 2007. It was very visionary. At the time, I remember being a bit concerned that most of what was in there was a vision and was not actual reality at that time, thinking that's a very tall order. And yes, it was, and it remains a tall order. But little by little, and as years have passed, a lot of what is in our strategic design has become a reality. Our strategic design is based in what is best for learners. We are uncompromisingly learner-centered, and it's steeped in equity. What would be best for every learner, so that every learner can leave Lindsay saying, I got whatever I needed while I was in Lindsay for a future of my choosing, to create options for learners, and to stop pretending that the clock or calendar decides learning for us. So the transition from a time-based, very industrial age system to a performance-based system in a Title I public school district where achievement was at times in single digits was a tall order. So fast forward to many years later, we began to apply for and get many different grants. Lindsay Unified, I have been here 30 years. We've always gone after money as it's available. But a lot of what we were doing was starting to be recognized as innovative and different and learner-centered. So I want to talk a little bit about the money, okay? And I just want to make sure that there's real clarification around it, because it's easy to think, well, if you get grant money, then you can implement competency-based education or performance-based education. If you have more money, you can do more. And to be very honest with you, that just isn't true. We made some of the biggest gains we've ever made right around 2012 in a deep recession with some of the lowest funding we'd ever seen. And grants and different money did help us realize the strategic design and pieces in it faster. But I want to make sure that you're hearing me loud and clear when I say it doesn't take millions of dollars to begin a journey to performance-based system or implement a competency-based model. What we were doing started to be recognized at the federal level as well as the state level. I'll give you a quick example for reference. Our first Teacher School Leader grant, also known as TSL, came right alongside other states, like New York, for instance. New York City schools with 1 million learners received $42 million through TSL. Lindsay Unified with 4,000 learners received $38 million. So yes, we were able to advance many of those pieces in a quick manner based on all of those other pieces. We then began to get other funding, different residency funds. We just recently got another TSL grant, a second round 5 years later for $8.5 million. And again, TSL is Teacher School Leader. So money's important. Yes, we were able to make a lot of progress with it, but the journey to a performance-based system isn't something that necessarily takes millions of dollars. So I just want to make that super clear. The other piece that I want to really highlight is data. So in a Title I public school district or anywhere else that you start to implement anything new, you're going to want to get really serious about your data. And Lindsay Unified is very serious about our data, realizing it's not the only thing that we look at. We look at many different things, but it is really important, and it's one way that you can really see if what actions are being implemented are working. So Lindsay has 4 different levels of data. We have data summits twice a year with our administrative team. We have data chats with the superintendent, myself, and our site principals. There are data chats between site administrators and learning facilitators, and a type of data chat with the learning facilitator and the learner. So all those pieces are really important to make sure that that progress is being made. So where does project-based learning fit into all of this, and how did we end up working with Defined? I want to talk about that for a minute. Project-based learning in Lindsay is not a new concept. It is not new. We did not hear about it from Defined. It is something that has been a board priority for many years. It is something that we have in different ways tried to implement, began to implement, did some micro-credentials around it, got some training, and this is, years ago. The one piece that really kept coming back is the time that it takes to plan project-based learning. So our strategic design, you heard me talk about it quite a bit. I have a copy here. I've got digital copies everywhere, but I just want to read one piece of our strategic design that talks about project-based learning. Most learning takes place in a real-life learning context where learners deal with real-life situations. Learning and demonstrating learning through projects is the norm. Okay, so that was written in 2007 and had yet to become a reality. So that is one of the pieces I wanted to talk about today, because that was one of the things that we really were going after, and it was a board priority for us. We knew it was good for learners, but implementing full scale had proven to be very challenging for our learning facilitators, not based on will, but based on how long it was taking them to plan these units. They had formal training around planning the units, but still it really hadn't taken hold except for a few pockets. So knowing we wanted to go forward with project-based learning for the entire district, also knowing, as I'm a very instructional person, knowing what that would take, and really creating an authentic mindset around project-based learning, not as a compliance item, but as a true authentic path to incorporating this for every learner. So that's where you see a graphic there that has a dimmer switch versus an on and off, right? I think previously we'd been approaching project-based learning as an on-off switch for whoever could implement based on training they'd received. And the authentic path to PBL in Lindsay was really going to take more of a dimmer switch approach. It was not like we're open for PBL and then we're closed for PBL, but more of an integrated approach that is really tailored more to our measurement topics. And Defined has been a partner that has been able to do that. So there are times when we've met with people in the past and explain our system, explain what performance-based education is, and people kind of start to physically back away while you're explaining, because it just seems, as some have said, like a lot of work. Yes, it is a lot of work, but it's not more work, it's different work. So the approach to authentic PBL learning is something that began a few years ago, and just keep in mind that graphic of the dimmer switch versus the on and off. And then I'm gonna ask Melissa to take us through what that looked like for Lindsay.
A big piece of this for us has been that we are competency-based. And in being competency-based, that means our learners have to show proficiency and that they're ready to move on with their learning before they complete a content level or they get credit for a class. And that adds an extra layer of needing to plan and prepare, because it is impossible to stay in the mindset of everybody gets the same thing on the same day at the same time. And so that added also an extra layer to how difficult it was to implement PBL, because it became very much about how do we check off this piece of learning to move on to the next. And so knowing how hard that was, it became extremely important to get that piece of the strategic design in that was around authentic learning, because it's great to have the understanding, but if I never know when I leave the school district how to apply that or why it's important, then it's a waste of time. So with that priority really being around those real life authentic learning experiences, and having had some people dabbling in PBL, we knew that it was what was right for our learners. So in March of 2022, we launched some professional learning around PBL for all of our staff. So in the past, people had opted into it and small groups had taken part. March, we were able to launch this for all, with hand in hand with defined learning, and also some optional cohorts that we had some of our learning facilitators join who really wanted to move forward fast. They were ready to take off running. And so through that, we started to see more projects being implemented. Having pre-made projects that were related to standards already helped set a foundation for PBL that then people could go personalize based off of the needs of their learners that were sitting in front of them on a daily basis. So in August of 2022, after we had done some touch points with our learning facilitators, we began a year-long rollout where the method really was try something. There was no expectation that everybody was going to do full projects with exhibitions or anything. It was just get into the platform, get some ideas, and try something out this year. So throughout that year, we provided additional opportunities for professional learning to learn about PBL, to hear from others who were actually implementing it in their learning environments. We had the cohorts that had been working with Defined, did some presenting. All of our staff were able to participate in a PBL project from a learner point of view. So just lots of opportunities to engage and kind of create this, or remove the veil of secrecy around PBL and take away that overwhelming feeling that it takes to plan a huge unit. And then during June of this last summer, we had our summer school offering that was completely centered around authentic learning. And we had some of our learning facilitators doing defined learning lessons, doing PBL with their learners, so that the learners really felt that they were having authentic experiences and they were learning, whether they really realized that or not. They had a lot of fun, exciting opportunities, and took part in those projects throughout a 3-week summer program. And then this year we've moved into some more rigid expectations. So last year they were able to play and try things out. And now in 2023, we've moved into an expectation that all learners have the opportunity to participate in 2 authentic learning opportunities. So it could be in the fall and then the spring, or 2 now, but we've always had a very large CTE program at our high school. And so those learners have had the opportunities for lots of project-based learning, authentic learning experiences through internships and just the design of their courses. So this was the chance to kind of bring that out to all of our contents, including our core contents. So this year, our learning facilitators are starting their implementation of full projects and some sort of exhibition where they will be sharing out those projects at each of our school sites. The summer program and those early implementers last year who were a part of those cohorts really helped set the stage for what authentic learning in the district would look like moving forward. We are a very, very rural district. So our learners have access to what jobs in agriculture look like and what jobs in education look like, and not a lot beyond that. So a big part of our authentic learning is letting our learners envision what their future could look like, which requires us to be able to see beyond our local community. So during our summer program, we were able to offer field trips for our learners that were directly related to the projects they were participating and related careers. So we have some examples here of just some different things that we were able to do. Some of our learners created miniature golf courses, and then they were able to travel to our closest miniature golf course and really put that into action, measure some things out, see how it worked, and then come back and apply that to their learning, and then have other learners participate in their miniature golf courses. We had learners learning about animals and habitats, and then taking trips to the zoo to see that in action. We had learners learning about flight. Most of our learners have not been out of our local city. They have not seen airplanes, not been on them. It's very hard for them to understand what that would look like. They were able to go to an airstrip nearby, get in an airplane, get in a helicopter, watch people jump out of airplanes, and just see a lot of stuff that otherwise would not be in their visioning for their future, or things that were even possible. We also have a great set of SROs, or school resource officers, who were able to talk about community helpers with our younger learners, and we were able to bring experiences to our learners on campus. We had some learning about beekeeping, and we had beekeepers come live, where our learners were able to try on all of their gear, see bees, taste honey, do some different activities around that, moving them beyond just the oranges that they see around us. We had learners making music and making those instruments. We've had learners, and our youngest learners, 4 years old in transitional kindergarten, who have worked on shelters for animals, and then we're able to go mix that with some authentic learning for our high school learners at our high school farm, and the high school learners were able to share what they do to take care of the animals and where they live with our youngest learners, to kind of cross those school bounds. And we are less than an hour away from the mountains, closer to 30 minutes you can be in the mountains, and many of our learners haven't been there. So we were able to bring in experts on river systems. Our learners were able to make some river systems, talk about erosion, and then go up into the mountains and see that in action and apply what they have learned. We also, the food truck vendors is a very popular project-based learning piece, because it involves so many different subject areas. Learners map things out, they create schedules, they create menus, they write reviews, create advertisements. So lots of pieces to that, and they do some math and some building of some 3D models. And that's great, but our learners don't have access to anything but a taco truck usually. And so they were given the opportunity to go to San Francisco, which is 4 hours away from us, 5 hours away, and go to a place that had multiple food trucks there. They could try out different foods that they had never had before, see in action what that looks like, and be a part of that bigger city type of environment that they don't normally get to see on a day-to-day basis. So there's just been a lot of opportunities through PBL to let them see careers and that they would never have access to within our own city. The authentic learning that takes place is amazing. They come back with stories. They have loved it. We worked in conjunction with Defined, and there's an article about some of our learners' experiences. And it has really made it I want to say it's like hidden learning. They don't really think about what they're learning in the moment. They are really focused on the fun that they're having, but the learning is deep, and it has provided, with our competency-based system, multiple entry points for our learners. So whether they are at grade level on reading or they're slightly below or ahead, they're able to come into the same project in different areas and be able to access it as a group and together to really push their learning forward, which has been really powerful for our learners and for our staff. And Defined Learning has really helped in that it has given us an access point to make it more doable by our learning facilitators. It is not starting with a little kernel of an idea that then takes hours and hours to plan out. They've got a base, and they can take that base and they can adjust it and fix it to really match what they see as a need for their learners in particular. So we are going to pass it over to Carol Ann Tomlinson.
Hear me? That might work better. So let me see. Make sure I'm trying to share from the right place here. And I'm not, because somehow the thing closed. So let me try this again. And here we go. Have I actually shared this, guys? Can you see my stuff? I don't think you can. Let me try this all over again.
No, we can't see it, Carol Ann.
Okay, let's try this again and see. I have multiple things coming at me and nothing's working. So
While Carol Ann is working with the joys of technology, I just wanted to pass on to you guys that
which I usually am.
brain research says to form a new neural pathway, we need to do something correctly 28 times over 3 weeks. But as Melissa was talking about her students having fun, when we're having fun, you get a new neural pathway when you do something correctly 3 times. So fun is so important in everything we're doing in school.
Okay, one more time. This should not be hard. Here we are. Okay. So what I'm going to work with today at the invitation of the folks in Defined Learning is to share some thoughts with you about differentiation as I have come to understand it over a very long period of time, and invite you to see links between some of the key practices and principles of differentiation and what Cinnamon and Melissa and their colleagues are doing in LAUSD with their learners and learning facilitators. Vocabulary matters, it really does. And so it's great to have that out front. I want to start with you a little bit with what I think differentiation is and isn't. And I'm going to do that because, as some of you may have encountered, there are lots of strange perceptions of what differentiation is. And working with misconceptions never gets us very far. So I'm going to talk with you about differentiation in general with my presentation, but stop and point out links that I see between the thinking that I'm going to share with you and what Melissa and Cinnamon are talking about, and invite you to find others, because what they're talking about is very rich and multi-layered, and we don't have nearly enough time to do it justice. For me, differentiation is not doing what we would think of as school-wide ability grouping. I hear really often, oh yeah, we differentiate because we put kids who are slow learners in one place and we put kids who are advanced learners over here, and the kids that are doing fairly well in a different room. And so some schools that I've been in have actually had not only 3, but 4 or 5 tracks of learners. And what we understand there is that we say we put students in those classes to teach them like they are. And that's true. And what happens is we keep teaching down to students who are already hurting. And research suggests to us it's very hard for them to get out of those classes because, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, because in fact, we are teaching down rather than lifting up. Of course, in most of our classes in schools, we have not done what Cinnamon and Melissa and their colleagues are doing, which is to say it's not about how much time you spend in the room or what you spend it in. You're going to be working on your own needs anyhow, which is a pretty good way to combat this. For me, it's also, and this again is a more traditional, I'd love to be able to see what's going on in that school district so I could make all the connections accurately. But in many schools, even if there's not school-wide ability grouping, we use math groups, we use reading groups, we sometimes use language groups. And so we think of students as our advanced students or our average students or our low students or our weak students and our strong students. That vocabulary is also very powerful and can be destructive. I've often thought of those kids in my own head as bluebirds, buzzards, and wombats. The bluebirds are the kids that get it right. The buzzards are the ones that are having a dickens of a time learning what we would like for them to learn. And in between, I've often called those kids wombats because I'm fascinated by wombats. They're little furry creatures. They aren't even birds. They're kind of nondescript. They fade back into the background. They'd rather be left alone. And that becomes how kids think of themselves. Oh, I'm one of those kids that goes with the kids that can't read all the time. I'm always working with the math kids that can't do math. And the personalized system that is very pervasive in this school district is one that I would assume does away with bluebirds, buzzards, and wombats, since students are moving on their own paces and at their own entry points. This is an interesting point to me. Differentiation is not an add-on to teaching. I think many folks think, okay, I can keep teaching just exactly like I am, but now I have to do this differentiation thing on top of that. One of the things that Cinnamon and Melissa and their colleagues did, largely at the because of the leadership of the two folks whose pictures are on your screen, was to say we can't keep doing everything we've been doing and fix this. We have to go into a completely different format with a whole different mindset. And differentiation calls on us for that as well. It's asking us to revolutionize the system, the school, the classroom, the way we think about education. And for that reason, it's challenging in exactly the same ways that the switch to competency-based education was that you've heard about today. Differentiation is not mostly for kids with identified learning needs. I hear that really often, and sometimes the subtext is if we just put them in a room with other kids that have trouble learning, then the rest of us wouldn't have to bother with all these differences. One of the things that seems to me to be important with what we're hearing today is that the shift, which is revolutionary, that we've been hearing about in LAUSD, is in fact revolutionary. It is saying every kid has a learning need, and we need to be meeting those needs where they are and continuing to move them on from there. And it's not inconvenient for us to do it because every student's going to be moving at different pace and with different sort of support systems. And so there's no point in putting kids in some place that further defines things that might not be helpful to define for them. It's also not mostly identified with kids who are advanced or identified as gifted. It should never be assigning extra work to learners who are advanced. It should never be dumbing down a curriculum for a student who has learning challenges. It should never be a learning plan for every a lesson plan for each learner, because that's just as crazy as assuming that you can do 400 different things for every kid every day and throw some problem-based learning in on top of it, and everybody's going to stay afloat. Can't do it. No point in it anyway. It doesn't have anything to do with any particular set of instructional strategies. I hear that so much. If you just show us the instructional strategies, we don't need to know anything else. Show us the instructional strategies and we'll go use those and we'll be fine. But it's all that undergirds those decisions and underlies it that really matters, not the strategies themselves. And differentiation is not incompatible with standards or goals or learning intentions or whatever we call the objectives that we're using. These are all misconceptions that I see often. And it seems to me that many of these are handled almost automatically with the decisions to change what's going on in the district we've been hearing about. What differentiation should be is understanding that human beings are individuals and that they learn individually. A reality to me that is a fascinating one that we wouldn't have even been able to talk about 25 or 30 years ago is that you really can't teach a class. We teach brains, and every brain is different from every other one. And there isn't a way, as John Hattie reminds us, to throw stuff out and have every brain catch it and make sense out of it. We have to look at the individual, really have to understand where they are as individuals and be prepared to move them along a continuum. And differentiation, as I'm sure these folks have found out with the work they're doing, is for every single learner in a classroom. Every learner needs us to be giving them the attention that they need, not just academically, but socially and affectively as well. And that's a one-on-one proposition. Again, that doesn't mean a lesson plan for everybody. It doesn't mean that we can't ever do anything alike. But what it does mean is we understand that the student needs to be the core of our decision making. So differentiation is asking us to plan with the student in mind rather than only or mostly the students. We found in our research at the University of Virginia that even when we were in a school district for a very long time and continued to talk with in conversations and presentations with teachers about differentiation, when we talked to them about what they were doing and what they were thinking, we almost never heard anybody refer to an individual student. In fact, I think it would be accurate to say we never did, even though we were in some of those places for 3 or 4 years. It's always the students like this, the students were restless yesterday, the students didn't do a very good job on this project, the students were frustrated yesterday, as though, again, we're trying to teach one brain. Differentiation needs to be attentive to every student's academic, intellectual, affective, and social development, because all of that is closely bound together. And if we're not attending to all of those pieces, we're doing an incomplete job to help students grow completely. It is learner-centered, which you've heard many times today. It's respectful teaching, and this is kind of a background thing. I didn't hear either Melissa or Cinnamon say our goal is to be respectful, but one of the things that was very clear to me the other day, and again today, is that there is huge respect in these two educators for the worth and the privilege of teaching every student that's in the district. And every one of them deserves, they think, high quality education, and every one of them deserves maximum progress they can make. The tone of voice, even for these two people, to me, speaks of respect. The fact that they brought the whole community together and said, this is your thing here. Help us know what's going to serve you best is an act of respect. The fact that they have determined that it is not okay for many students in their school not to graduate or not to read, and that they're going to do whatever it takes to make that happen is a huge act of respect. And although we didn't talk about this today, one of the things that I heard very clearly when we were together for sort of a get acquainted session last week is that is something these two people transfer to their learning facilitators. They have great respect for those teachers, and while they want to lead them in a direction that's promising, they also have respect for them enough to get their feedback, to work with their timetables, to trust what they're saying them. That's massively important, I think. Differentiation is responsive teaching, which means that, in fact, and you've heard some allusions to this some too, we need to know what the kids' aspirations are. Not that we need to necessarily stop there, but we need to know where they're entering. We need to know their interests. We need to give options on how to learn, in what order they might do things, to help them develop agency, to understand learning barriers that might be in their way, and to know how to work around those and through those and over those. David Sousa, who talks about the brain and learning, said to me one time that he thought differentiation, best definition of differentiation he had been able to muster, was a teacher attempting to see the classroom through the eyes of a student. What is this student experiencing? How does it feel? What can we do to make it more dynamic, more engaging, more effective? you've heard this morning too. Differentiation for me ought to always be based on our current best understanding of what it means to teach well and to learn vigorously, based on research from psychology, pedagogy, neuroscience, and the art of teaching, which we can see around us with the expert teachers who are always in our midst and people who write about that as well. Differentiation is often subtle. A young man in England asked me with some irritation a couple of summers ago if differentiation always has to be in your face. And I said, can you tell me what you mean by that? And he said, my principal says that when she comes into our room, she has to be able to see us differentiate 3 times within 15 minutes or we're not doing it right. And he said, I feel like a lot of what I'm doing is way beneath the surface, but it's there. I think he was exactly right. And I think to say you have to clock it 3 times in 15 minutes is to sort of misunderstand the complexity of working with individuals. I think differentiation is a way of being in a classroom. And while I haven't discussed this with Melissa and Cinnamon, I'm guessing that they have seen competency-based teaching and learning become a way of being in a classroom. It's how we think about time. It's how we think about materials. It's how we establish expectations. It's how we treat students. It's how we help them become more in charge of their own understanding and their own aspirations for learning. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I become when I enter that classroom. And I love the difference between the light switch and the dimmer switch. I'm sure it has been easy for not easy maybe for folks in this place to say, we just can't do this. It's just too much. Which is to say, I'm thinking you expect a light switch and I can't do light switch. Differentiation is a skill set that's learned by teachers who study their students systematically, try different approaches over time, reflect readily and repeatedly on what works most effectively, and for whom. We hear a lot in education about buying what works. I'm giving you the wrong name. John Hattie now is trying to say Dylan Williams, but that wasn't what I meant. John Hattie says, we ought not to ask what works. We ought to ask is what works, for whom, under what circumstances, and why. And personalization, the competency-based system, gives teachers the invitation to do that. Hattie reminds us, and I'm guessing this is a reality, or at least was back in the old days before they made the shift, that in almost any classroom, the grade level that you teach points to at least the levels of readiness that are in that class. So if you're teaching a level 5, grade 5 class, there probably at least a 5-year span of readiness levels. If you're teaching a grade 9 class, there's probably at least a 9-year span of grade levels. And he points out that that is a daunting prospect, and how to deal with that is a major concern. And so this is what Hattie says about what differentiation is or should be. And I think it's something that you've heard in the materials this morning. He says teachers have to know where their students are at any point in a trajectory of learning. And their goal has to be to move them +1 beyond that point. So the idea of teaching the class as a whole is unlikely to pitch the lesson correctly for many students. This is where the skill of teachers knowing the similarities across students and allowing for the differences becomes so important. And that's really the core of competency-based learning as I understand it. And he says differentiation relates primarily to structuring classes so that all students are working at or +1 from where they start, so that all students can have maximal opportunities to attain the success criteria of the lesson. And I think that's clearly where the competency-based work is going. You have choices about pace, probably have choices about order of operations at some point. You can go back and try again if you needed to, but the goal is to help you persistently move along step by step as vigorously as you can through a learning cycle. So +1 teaching means consistently supporting students, taking their next steps, again, in affective development. And I've not heard Melissa or Cinnamon talk about this, but my guess would be that students are feeling more emotionally whole and in charge of what they're doing because they can make decisions and see themselves moving along, and they can see the growing success in their district. To help them develop step by step cognitively and intellectually, and I don't think those two things are necessarily the same, and to develop as fully as they can socially, because all three of those things have to come together for us to become who we hope we can be. I want to do this really quickly with you, but this is something that has become really important to me over time. Again, I have seen so many people say, oh, I differentiate. We did that last year. And I do learning contracts, so I differentiate. I'm kind of finished here. All of us who are in classrooms have 5 key classroom elements that are there every day. And if we want to do the best that we can for students, every one of those elements has to have 2 attributes. It has to be used to benefit students, and it has to be used to benefit a student in the way that that student can progress the best. So we have learning environments. We sometimes don't talk about those much in school, but they're hugely foundational. Kids learn best when they wake up every morning thinking, I'm good to go there today. That's a good place. They see me, they like me, they appreciate me. They don't expect me to change myself so I can be suitable for them. I'm challenged really hard, but there's a support system. If I work at it, I can usually see success. I feel like I'm a partner with my teacher who gets to know me better all the time. They're teaching us how to build partnerships with our peers so that we can work as a team of learners. If we're not attending to the learning environment, then the rest of these elements can't work. We need curriculum that has clear learning targets. And this is one of the hardest ones for us. Those targets need to be very clearly stated in terms of what knowledge matters most, what skills matter most, and we talk about that a lot. But what big ideas, what concepts, what principles matter? It's huge in kids developing meaningful knowledge and making connections. Curriculum needs to be planned for student engagement. If kids aren't being engaged, if they aren't feeling drawn to what they're doing, we've lost many of them before we start. And good curriculum focuses on understanding, and it's planned for teaching up, and we're going to look at that in just a second. Cinnamon talked about the importance of data in their work. And one key piece of data for teachers is, how do I know today who's moving along? How do I know where they're going in the right direction, ahead of us, behind us, which is not an issue in a competency-based class, but is in many of ours. It's important for us to know where a student should be going and where that student is along the journey so that we can make adjustments in what we're doing with and for that student, and to help the student get so that they understand how to track their progress. Here's what I'm aiming for. Here's what I've been doing. Here's how it's going. Here's some things I can do to get better. In many schools, formative assessment is either missing in action or kind of close to that. Our instruction needs to be dynamic, collaborative, active, focused on teaching up, in clear alignment with the KUDs. And and this last one, I'm quite sure folks have become adept at where they are now in working with this competency-based thing. How do I handle a classroom where everybody's not trying to do the same thing all the time? How do I find time to get to the students? What do they do if they need to have help and I'm not standing right there? How do we make sure they're getting the materials they need and that those get put back like they should? What do we do to help kids understand why they're working as they're working in a classroom? Working with these things, to me, is the essence of differentiation. And what we're hoping for is that this is how our classrooms work. Environment turns with curriculum and assessment and instruction, and all that is bounded by a teacher's leadership of kids and ability to work with those students to make classroom routines work. For me, that's what differentiation is, and I believe I hear a really lot of this in what Cinnamon and Melissa are talking about. So second thing that I'd like to talk with you about briefly, and I'm going to try to make sure I'm going somewhere here, and I'm going to have to do this kind of quickly. This is an interesting thing to consider, and I'm hearing Cinnamon and Melissa talking a lot about this. I think for me, this is a lot of where defined learning comes in. I read an article when I got, not too long after I got to the university, that talked about what they called a pedagogy of poverty, written by Martin Haberman. And he says, in traditional schools, you can walk down a hall, and if there's a window in the classroom door, even though the door is shut, you can kind of see what life's like in there. And in some places, what you see is a class where this is the routine all the time. Teachers giving information, asking right answer questions, giving direction, giving low-level tasks, monitoring seat work, going over and over stuff, giving tests, going over tests, assigning homework, going over homework, settling disputes because the kids are not too thrilled with what's going on, punishing non-compliance, grading papers, and giving grades. All of us do some of that in our classes. We have to, but he's saying some kids were getting a steady diet of this. And he said, I call it a pedagogy of poverty for two reasons. Many of the kids who are taught this way are kids from low-income backgrounds, second language learners, students with learning challenges, which may or may not be identified. And the second reason you can call it a pedagogy of poverty is that if we continue to give those kids this kind of schooling, you can almost guarantee that they will have a life of poverty because they're not prepared for the world they're going into. About 10 years after that, I saw a second article, which was not 10 years old. It was just coming out, which was the preface to a book written by Helene Hodges on what she called a pedagogy of plenty. And listen now to the differences in what you're hearing from Cinnamon and Melissa. Said you can look through some of these doors and the kids are doing authentic tasks, meaning-driven curriculum, literacy-rich environments, all kinds of inputs for kids with reading and literacy and all kinds of subjects, quality resources, connecting school with home, problem-focused learning, kids becoming aware of their cognition and metacognition in the context of what they're doing, lots of collaboration on work that means a lot to the kids, working with different kids a lot all the time, getting different perspectives on things, engaged in substantive dialogue, discussion, debate about things that mean something to them related to the context. And he says you can call this a pedagogy of plenty for two reasons. Most of the kids who have this kind of work steadily come from homes that have reliable incomes, not rich necessarily, but enough to be comfortable to open up the world, to let kids have vistas that are broader and see themselves in a much bigger world. And the second reason she said you can call it a pedagogy of plenty is if kids get this kind of work throughout their school careers, the chances are so much greater that they will have a life that is stable and has enough in it to be able to live comfortably and do what the person needs to do with and for their families. I think this is happening in many ways already in the district that we're hearing about. But I think as Melissa was talking to us about the summer school opportunities and the kinds of work that's starting to be done with problem-based learning or inquiry learning, this is the merging of really good work that makes sure students have the fundamental skills necessary to move ahead and opportunities to move the world out in front of them, to move into the world. This kind of learning experience is a belief that learning should expand a learner's sense of the world. Good learning would expand a kid's understanding of the possibilities that the world holds, and also help the kids see more and more and more possibilities that he or she has in the world. And I think that's a path that they are moving down in the same thoughtful, steady way they've done the other work they've done. So for me, this is what I think of as teaching up. not teaching down to kids who have difficulty, but doing something that consciously lifts them up and helps them understand what it means to do dynamic, excellent, thought-provoking work. So it means high ceilings of excellence, high ceilings of expectation, because what we're hoping for is that all kids get a sense of what it means to do excellent work. And that requires high ladders of support, so that kids who look at that work and think, maybe somebody, but not me, understand that there's a support system that can help them get there. Some people call that aspirational learning, beautiful work, distinguished learning, ambitious instruction. Been lots of work done with this over years in many different places. And the idea of teaching up is a wonderful way to open the world and to give kids authentic learning experiences that help them have a kaleidoscope of opportunities that they wouldn't have had before. Stephen Levy, who is one of my favorite, Ron Berger, who's one of my favorite educational writers, one of my heroes, says, and by the way, some of you may know, he's the head of what's now called EL schools, which I guess is the educational equivalent of Kentucky Fried Chicken, which is just now KFC, but EL is Expeditionary Learning Schools. And he says, I believe that work of excellence is transformational. Once a student sees that he or she is capable of excellence, that student is never quite the same. There's a new self-image, a notion of possibility. There's an appetite for excellence. After students have had a taste of excellence, they're never quite satisfied with less. They're always hungry. And what he's talking about with excellence is excellence in things like what defined learning does, in something that opens up the world, in things you've never seen yourself in, but you're shepherded through that process until you suddenly realize the thing you thought was impossible is not. And one of the most important things, I think, for us to think about, and I'm pretty well convinced that the folks in this district have thought about everything, you can do beautiful work and infuse the fundamental things into it, so that as the students are doing that, they're continually using the skills that they're learning in whatever the content area is, in a new wrapper, in a new experience, in an expanded opportunity to learn. And I think I'm supposed to stop now. So I'm going to do that almost right now. One of the things that I think was really interesting to me when we were talking the other day, the three of us along with Maggie, is that these folks have started with the question of why do we need to change everything we do? They didn't start with how are we going to do something or what are we going to do? They started with why. And they have that vision, and they have worked steadily toward that vision, and it involved every stakeholder in going there. And they use that as a touch point. What is it we want for the children? It's not that we've adopted a system and we're going to stick slavishly to that. It's why would we change? And in that changing, why would we do the things that we need to do, and to make sure that every stakeholder understands that and is a part of it. Second thing that they're doing, which is so important, and this is the light switch, dimmer switch, they've started with a clear vision, and they have known for years what that vision was, but they've gone at it step by step by step, so that all of their stakeholders, including their learning facilitators, most importantly, probably, are ready to go with them, so that it doesn't bowl them over every time they hear something. We try to do the on-off switch in education so often, and dimmer switch is what we need. This line comes from a children's book that I like a lot. Math teacher explaining to a little boy why he's doing the math work he's doing, says to him, you can't go where you're going without being where you are. You can't get where you're going without being where you are. And one of the most important things these two people and their colleagues have done was to take a hard look at where they were and saying, okay, just like the kids, we have to start where we are and go in a stepwise fashion. And that's why they've been able to sustain this, I think, and make the progress that they've made. Plus the fact these are two very smart, savvy people who are dedicated as the dickens to what they're doing, and that'll win the day almost every time. So End of that story, because I've already run over for a couple of minutes. So Cindy, it's yours.
Thank you so much, Carol Ann. If you want to stop sharing.
I did, I think.
Okay, there we go. We have a few questions and I saw some good comments. Let's start with one. How can you do this with, I think this is more for Cinnamon and Melissa, but Carol Ann, you as well. How can we do competency-based learning with kindergarten through third grade students? They say, some of their colleagues say, we can't do that with our students.
Well, I think we can both add here, but it can seem really daunting. And so I think honoring the fact that this is different, this is a second order change, this is not something that you can add a strategy to and be done. So honoring the fact that it is daunting and a little bit scary for some. But if you're going to be uncompromisingly learner-centered, our strategic design was not written for 412. It was written for everyone. And so I think having instructional leaders who are more than a building manager, who are truly instructional leaders that can get in there and help problem solve, as opposed to assign the work and say, you know, good luck and see you in June. So really working alongside with all of those educational partners and not making it an option. So project-based learning, competency-based education, we did have spots that were early adopters that we said, okay, try it out. We're heading this direction, but we're all going there eventually. And eventually was not 3 to 5 years. Eventually was sooner than later. So I think that if it's optional, you'll have some people that never begin. And so if you begin, you can begin in spaces or a little bit smaller, but it's not an option, especially if you're going to think about the moral imperative of those learners that that don't have another avenue, as Melissa talked about, for breaking out of a very rural town and very rural mindset at times. So Melissa, do you want to add anything to that?
I think one of the things that gets lost a little bit in the development of both competency-based education and project-based learning type activities is people think it means that there's an end to any type of direct instruction. And so that's not the case. There's always this continual, I need to in some way get the skills and the knowledge transformed. It's then about what are they doing with that and how are they interacting with that to help make it stick and make it relevant to their lives, is that additional piece that really gets pushed with project-based learning. We're still doing literacy lessons with our kindergartners, phonics. You know, we're still hitting those pieces that they need. It's just now we're doing it with this lens of how does that look in real life? How is that relevant to my day-to-day learning, so that they can really make it stick and continue on with them in the future years.
Definitely. And from my perspective, I see project-based learning as giving kids a reason and many avenues to master the standards that matter to them. Carol Ann, this question's for you. And there are lots of people asking about the presentation. You will receive an email with a link that has the webinar in it that you can share with other people. But for Carol Ann, someone wanted to know, how do the rubrics you have in your differentiation and practice resource, how do they translate to standards-based grading?
Well, I think the rubric should always be crafted around the method that you're using. I can tell you again from my perspective that because of my belief in teaching up, the content that we're assigned, what it is that either has been determined for us or that we determine or some combination, is what students are responsible for, and what we're responsible for determines the content that will be in the rubrics. But for me, what really matters there, for example, is when I design a rubric, whether it was for my 7th graders, 8th graders, 9th graders, or college people, masters, undergraduate, PhD students, the first column in a rubric for me was meets expectations, not what it looks like if it's lousy, but what it looks like when you're doing competent work, and then working with students to go there. That's sort of a belief thing for me. And many years ago, I heard Grant Wiggins talk about how important it is to have a column on a rubric that nobody in your class can read. There's just no chance, so that those kids who are ahead get a little sense of, wow, somebody out there can do that. I guess it's not me. So for me, the distribution is what competence looks like, and then helping that grow up step by step, depending on what it is you're talking about. So, for example, in communication, communication that's clear should be a beginning point. But what does it look like if it goes beyond clear all the way to expertise? And so for me, that I hope I'm answering your question, but standards determine the content. But for me, it's always important to say a list of standards is not a curriculum. A textbook is not a curriculum. A batch of information is not a curriculum. We've ruined that in recent years, and we've determined that all we're going to do is cover standards, and it's disjointed and it doesn't make any sense to kids a lot of times. That's why, again, for me, the coupling of project-based learning and standards-based curriculum or competency-based curriculum are a great match, because it gives a context in which those things can be stretched. I don't know if that helps, but that's,
yeah, I think that helps. Another question they had is, what happens to the gifted learners when you're doing competency-based learners? So for our friends in Lindsay, how are you dealing with those kids who really need to be challenged?
Well, honestly, every learner really needs to be challenged. So I think that our approach to gifted education is we actually don't have a gifted and talented program. Every learner needs to be challenged and can even work ahead. We have learners that work ahead. They're not dependent on the adult in the room. They're not dependent on the learning facilitator for their curriculum. Their curriculum is online. So they want to begin, if they want to look ahead and maybe in a different subject, they need to go back and forth. It's a continuum of learning that isn't defined by time. So our learners are challenged, and that's one of the things that when people ask us, well, you know, our achievement's really great, why would we do something like this, or why would we consider something like this? Achievement might be great. We are also held to the same standard as everyone else in the state of California for assessment. But are your learners really getting what they need, or can they perform on a state test? Those are two separate statements. So for example, we have a very healthy assessment vision. We do have all the same requirements as any other public school in California. But part of our assessment vision from our strategic design reads, learners are allowed and encouraged to demonstrate their learning in various ways. Written tests are not the dominant manner for assessing learning. Learner performances, which include projects, are very popular and emphasized. So, Melissa, you want to add anything?
I just think the big piece there is there's no, the learners who are ready to move forward in a particular content can. There's no cap on you're this years old, this is as far as you're going to go. So that allows it to be flexible. History may be my jam, and I can move into the next level because everything is clearly lined out in the progression of learning, as opposed to it needing to be in 5th grade, I learned this, in 6th grade, I learned this. I can go glam onto something in the next year when next state defined year of learning based on what is in there. I can move forward if that's my area, but maybe science is not my area and I need to spend some extra time there, then I can get that extra time in that learning. And it can be kind of tailor fit in that way, but there's always this push to not only go farther in learning and keep going, but to go deeper. So maybe I really learned about I learned about body systems and science, but you know, my grandpa just had a heart attack last year. And so that's something that's interesting to me. And so further learning in that, or a push for learners that are ready for more, can sometimes be just going deeper into a topic that they have a personal connection to or some extra interest in, because they know what they want to do when they're older, but really giving them that freedom to do that. And a lot of times in their project, that's the beauty of a project, is that they, you know, there is the end goal. By the end, I'm going to show something, but there's a lot of flexibility in that on how deep they can take it, or how they can demonstrate that to allow for some additional differentiation in there and pushing for the learners who are ready.
The other
Another
piece that I really, we've talked a lot about academics, which as executive director for curriculum and instruction is my world. But we also really pay attention to the whole learner, and what type of adults we want them to be, what type of adults their parents want them to be, and what they really want for themselves. So incorporated into the strategic design lifelong learning standards, what type of person do you really want to be? And so that's another level that is woven in and can be integrated heavily into our work with Defined. But it's not just academic progress. We want problem solvers who persevere. We want learners who don't give up at the first sign of difficulty. And so that's just another added piece that that Defined has helped us enhance.
Another question that we have is, what does this look like in math? And I get this question a lot of times, like, they're like, you were a science teacher. I understand you get project-based learning, but I'm a math teacher and I have my standards. So can you guys talk about how this is working in math?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell you that math is one of our most popular areas. That really does lend itself, but I'm gonna let our math specialist, Melissa, has a really extensive background and she's got feelings about this. So I want to ask her to share those.
So I think one of the great pieces of math in general is that it is all around us, and sometimes it's hidden, but it's there. And all of the examples I showed of different things learners were doing for project-based learning involved math in some way. So they are using measuring skills, they're modeling. A lot of the math practice standards come into play heavily when the learners are working on projects. But they are doing a lot of specific work around math, even though it doesn't appear like even our littlest learners doing their shelters for animals. Well, it on the outside is, okay, we're building shelters, we're talking about some scientific concepts in there, but they have to measure, is this big enough to fit my animal? Is this like some spatial things going on there that have to do with math? So even when math is not the primary focus of a project, it is often embedded in the background of the projects and getting to where they need to be, which I love to point out to learners, because it's like, yes, you are a mathematician, you just did it and you didn't even know it. Kind of brings those pieces out. We are big math mindset people in our district, so that is a great way to bring about, we're all doing math all the time. And one of the pieces that I found within Define, I do find our secondary math, just the concepts in there, it is often hard for them to wrap around to that real world connotation or the real world application of those different pieces. And that's been one of the great things about Defined, is all the way through our pre-calculus, calculus classes, there are some options within the platform of already done projects that are focused around the math skills that learners, that our learning facilitators can pull for learners to bring together that math learning that they're doing within their learning environments.
The other piece I just want to highlight about just that tentative feeling that, you know, this is not a perfection type piece, right? But that tentative feeling that people have because they are nervous or afraid to do it wrong, or aren't sure what their learning facilitators will think or how it will look. It's okay to be nervous or even afraid, but don't let that stop you. You have a ton of clients out there depending on you. You have a ton of learners that in many cases, the decision you make around this or don't make around this affects them long term. So be nervous, but do it anyway.
Cindy, if I can go back to the question that somebody asked about students who are really advanced. It's a great thing as teachers are learning, getting familiar with a project instead of 14 at the same time, to be able to say to a student who's really good in math, how can you adapt this so that the math is clearer? What component would you like to add yourself to this project so that it gives you a chance to explore this thing further? How can we take what's here and build greater depth of understanding in it? The kids can do that for you really often, and it's a wonderful way for them to contribute and for us to learn from them. And all of us as teachers, maybe not the first time we do a project, which is a good reason not to throw that one away and start over again every time, can come back and say, I could have made this language skill or this concept in history clearer if I'd thought of X, and continue to modify those so that it brings those things to the foreground. To me, the beauty of it is when the most important things in the foundational things you're trying to help kids master and the authentic stuff can really blend together. It's not you do this over here and you do this over here, but we bring them together closer all the time.
Well, ladies, thank you so much. What a rich time on this webinar. Great questions. Thanks all of you for joining us. You will receive an email with a link to the webinar, so please share it with people who weren't able to be with us. And we thank you for all the questions about competency-based learning, project-based learning. If you'd like to talk to us at Define Learning, we'd be happy to help you figure out how to move forward. We do believe you can't win if you don't begin, so get started. This is the right way for our kids to learn. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Pleasure to learn from you, ladies.